Alright, now we have some super short notes. Alright, again, it's about transversals, those lines that cross a couple of other lines. Our essential question now is, what's so special about a transversal crossing parallel lines? People are always talking about transversal crossing parallel lines, transversal crossing parallel lines. Who cares? Alright, so I'm going to take a look here. I'm going to draw myself a big diagram. See, I got, there's a line. There's a line. I'm putting the little, parallel. Right? So we have two parallel lines with the little markings that say that they're parallel. I now have a transversal crossing through them. Okay. Here's the trick with the transversal crossing parallel lines, with the special thing. This angle right here, okay, is going to be congruent to its corresponding angle. That only happens with parallel lines. Okay? And of course, since this angle over here is its corresponding angle's vertical angle, then they're congruent. And this angle here being vertical angles with the original, they're congruent. So all those four angles are the same measure, all the same. So we'll make a little note here. All right. Congruent. On the other hand, we have these two angles, right? They're congruent because they're vertical angles. But this angle is also congruent to its corresponding angle. And its corresponding angle is congruent with the angle across from it because they're vertical angles. So in that case, also congruent. So those four angles are congruent in this sort of zigzag pattern. Shoop, shoop, right? Or shoop, shoop, right? Congruent. That only happens with parallel lines. If the lines aren't parallel, that doesn't happen. If that doesn't happen, you know the lines aren't parallel. One last thing. If we have one of those types, if we mix them up, they are supplementary. So they add up to 180 degrees. So let's take a look at what that means. For example, this angle and this angle are alternate interior angles, and they're congruent. This angle and this angle, alternate interior angles, and they're congruent. This angle and this angle, corresponding angles, they're congruent. Same for all the other corresponding angles. This angle and this angle, alternate exterior angles, also congruent. And then we have this angle and this angle, same side or consecutive interior angles, also congruent. Now, the important thing to remember is just this pattern. That in this sort of zigzag pattern through the parallel lines and the transversal, through the angles, they're all congruent, and going the other way, they're all congruent, and if you mix them up, they're supplementary. I will not say this like 100% of the time, because sometimes people will use diagrams to trick you, but most of the time, if the angles look like they're the same measure, look like they're open the same amount, then they're congruent. And if they don't look like they're open the same amount, then they're supplementary. Most of the time. You can usually follow that in a diagram, but you can't always trust it. So it's best if you remember that zigzag pattern through the diagram or going the other way. Okay? All right. Looks like you're ready for some questions.